To demonstrate today's fix, I had to cut my own telescope in half so you don't have to. Fun fact. These Astroscan telescopes were assembled in two halves, held together by a strong glue. To show you what the inside of these really look like, I'm sacrificing this telescope for the channel. Don't worry though, I will eventually glue this back together someday. Whew. I'm going to show you how to fix the #1 reason that people throw their Astroscan telescopes in the trash. All right, let me just dig this out of the trash can. Welcome back to the Astronomy Garage. I'm your host, Refractor. This video is all about the primary mirror that sits at the back of the Astroscan telescope. This guy right here. In my previous video on the Astroscan, I showed you a step-by-step method for collimating or aligning the optics of that secondary mirror that sits up here. This guy. And if you watched the video, you found out that it's really not all that hard to do. But today we're going to talk about something really, really important. We're going to focus on the primary mirror that sits inside this red ball at the back. It's the main mirror, and unfortunately, that mirror is the main reason that people get rid of these Astroscan telescopes. That hurts me to say that because the fix is actually pretty straightforward. Let's take advantage of this cutaway and see how this little telescope works. This cutaway shows you just how simple these telescopes are. Now, before using any telescope, of course, you have to remove the dust cover off the front. Now, the way it works is light comes in the front. It goes through this transparent window right here. Now, this window is just plain glass. It doesn't do any kind of pre-treating of the light. It only holds the secondary mirror in the middle of the tube. Now, that light goes through there. It comes back and it hits the primary mirror, which is actually bowl-shaped. And that causes the light to reflect off of that in a cone, which comes forward and hits this slanted mirror, the slanted secondary mirror, which makes the light bounce at 90 degrees out the side of the telescope. Now, in theory, you have a focuser tube that can go up and down, and it has an eyepiece in it, and that's where you look into it to see the wonderful view that the telescope is presenting you. Now, it's really easy to get to this primary mirror in this cutaway, but of course, as we saw in the first Astroscan video, it's actually a bit of a challenge to get to this in a normal Astroscan that's not, cut in half. Because first, you have to remove this front retainer spring right there. And then through some technique, you have to pull this out the front, right? And that does give you access to the primary mirror. So you would have to reach down the tube, and you would have to finagle this ring out of here like that. Pull it out, and then there's just enough room for basically a thumb and a finger to reach between these two counterweights, and this just slides forward, and you might have to take it out like that, and that's how you would typically get it out. Occasionally it's kind of wedged in here. It has these fingers that grip it. And so if it's wedged in there for some reason, in theory, you could tip this up and let it come down, use gravity as your helper. If it's still wedged, you can take a little wooden dowel rod, and there's this little hole in the back of the telescope, and push the dowel rod in there, and that'll help you get that mirror out of there. If you've been enjoying this video, please push the like and subscribe button, and be sure to push the bell so you can get future notifications. Don't be alarmed if your Astroscan rings don't look like this. In fact, they should not look like this. I 3D printed these on my Creality printer using STL files that I got from an astrophotographer named Hyrum Critchlow. He was nice enough to allow me to use them. In fact, they are now on Thingiverse, and if you want to download them for free, I'll put a link down in the description box. One quick note though, I printed these in white filament just because that's the only color filament that I had. In reality, if you're going to be using these on your telescope, then you would want to print them in a darker color. No, the real rings look like this, and just like the white ones, they do come in two different sizes. The big one goes in the front. It holds in the secondary mirror assembly, and of course the little one holds in the primary mirror itself. Removing these springs is either going to be very, very easy or very, very hard. If you're lucky, then the spring in your Astroscan has two little holes, one at each end of the spring gap here, and you can get your pliers that you got from Home Depot or Harbor Freight or something. I'll put a link to some down in the description box, and you put it in the holes, you squeeze it, and then the whole spring pops out. It's pretty straightforward. It takes you about 10 seconds. Unfortunately, a lot of Astroscans out there do not have holes in them. It's just a steel blunt end cut off. And if that's the case, well, you have my condolences. It's going to take you about 10 or 20 minutes to get those things out. You have to pry one end out either with your finger or with a screwdriver and then work your way around, right? And then it just pops out. Now be careful. You want to wear safety glasses because there's so much load on these springs that they can shatter the glass, especially on that front secondary mirror assembly. If that is the case and your rings don't have any holes, well, all is not lost, because if you have a Dremel tool, you can fix the issue. As you can see here, let's see if you can see the notch. There's a notch cut in the end of this. I took a Dremel tool with a cutoff and I cut a notch. You don't want to go too far into it because you don't want to weaken the seal. And I used my spring removers. This is just a really old one. I got these from I think a yard sale. And you put these in the holes, and once again, squeeze it and you pull it out. As with any time you're using a Dremel tool, wear your safety glasses. Now I have a favor to ask. Please look at your Astroscan telescope and leave a comment down below to tell me whether your springs have holes in them or they don't have holes. I'm very curious what the ratio is of the spring types that are out there in the wild. And in case you're wondering, I did try to drill holes in these with specialty drill bits, and unfortunately I wasn't able to do that. But the Dremel tool did make these nice convenient slots. Okay, so this is the star of the video. This is the primary mirror from my Astroscan telescope. It has a diameter of 4 1/4 inches and a thickness of about 0.65 inches. As with all telescope mirrors, the reflective aluminum coating is on the front. And that's very different than what you'd see in a household mirror, where the reflective coating is painted on the back of the glass. With telescope mirrors, we have to put it on the front because the front is not flat. It's actually shaped like a concave bowl. And because of that, reflective coating goes on the front. Now, as I mentioned, the diameter is 4 1/4 inches, but that retaining ring that we talked so much about actually eats up about 1/16 of an inch around the outside edge. That means that the usable reflective surface of an Astroscan mirror is only about 4 1/8 inches. Hopefully that clears up some of the confusion if you've read literature about the Astroscan mirrors. As I mentioned, getting this out of the telescope can be a little bit of a challenge. It's not really all that hard as long as you're careful. But why would you want to do that in the first place? Well, there's 3 main reasons. The third one is a doozy, and that's the one that causes people to throw these away. Okay, so the first reason to remove your primary mirror is because it's filthy. That means it's covered with a layer of dust or bugs. Now, the first defense is to take an air bulb and just try to get the dust off. If that doesn't work and it's still really dirty, there is a very safe method to cleaning telescope mirrors, and I have a whole video dedicated to that. I won't take up your time here with it, but I will put a link to that video down in the description box. The good news is that Astroscans are sealed telescopes. Up front, you have this glass disc that holds the secondary mirror, and that pretty much keeps out the dust and other environmental hazards from getting into the tube of the Astroscans. So they're usually pretty clean. There was one instance where I saw a used Astroscan for sale really cheap on eBay, and it was filled with sand. Apparently somebody had found one on the beach and decided to list it on eBay without even cleaning it. It was going for really cheap, and I thought about buying it just for the novelty reason. But you know what? The Astronomy Garage's budget is pretty tight these days, so I decided I would pass. Okay, so the second reason you would want to remove the primary mirror from your Astroscan is to get the aluminum surface recoated. Believe it or not, that surface can be damaged either physically or even chemically if it's in a caustic environment. And I've had to do this on a few of my telescopes because I buy telescopes that are damaged. Fortunately, you can get them professionally recoated, and it's a pretty fascinating process. They chemically strip the existing aluminum surface off, and then they put it into what's called a vapor deposition chamber. And there's a little piece of aluminum nearby. They heat it up, and it vaporizes, and then it just settles down on the surface, and it makes this wonderful reflective coating. As of 2025, I use a company out of Virginia called Majestic Optical Coatings, and they've done a really good job several times that I've used them. Getting a mirror recoated is not a cheap process, but it is a whole lot cheaper than buying a brand new mirror. But when it comes to the coating on an Astroscan telescope, there is a really big gotcha that I learned about only from research, and I got to show this one to you. So I mentioned that this is a curved mirror, right? Let's see if we can see it. You can sort of see it, right? It's actually a shape. It's a concave bowl shape. It's technically a parabola, or in 3D it's called a paraboloid. There is a cheaper mirror bowl shape out there that you can buy for a mirror, and that is called the spherical mirror. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with a spherical mirror except it doesn't produce as good an image as a parabolic mirror. Thus, parabolic mirrors are typically more expensive. There are ways to get around the shortcomings of the spherical mirror. You can pre-treat the light with either a corrector plate or a meniscus lens before the light even hits the spherical mirror. That's exactly how Schmidt Cassegrain and Maxitov Cassegrains get away with using the relatively cheaper spherical mirrors. But parabolic mirrors don't need those corrective plates upstream. They just produce a sharper image. Now, at the time they were making the Astroscan telescope, the parabolic mirrors were more expensive to produce. So the makers of the Astroscan, Edmund Scientific, decided to use a kind of a clever trick for creating parabolic mirrors from a spherical mirror. Now, we don't know exactly how long they did this. If you do know, please leave a comment down below. But here's what they did. They started with a relatively cheaper spherical mirror, and then through a clever layering of aluminum coatings, they sort of produced what was effectively a parabolic mirror. Now, through my research, unfortunately, there's no way to tell if your mirror has the true parabolic shape or a simulated parabolic shape. So if you decide to send your mirror off to get recoated, there is a small chance that it will come back as a shiny spherical mirror and the image will be degraded. Unfortunately, only you can decide if it's worth the risk. Reason number 3 that you would want to remove the primary mirror from the back of the telescope is to replace this foam. That's right, this foam is the cause for most of these ending up in the trash. It hurts me to think that, but unfortunately that is the case. Some of these telescopes are pushing 50 years old, and that foam just deteriorates. It literally falls apart. That foam is supposed to be kind of a compressive cushion that pushes the mirror forward against the retainer ring. Now, you can imagine if the foam falls apart, the mirror sort of settles back, and sometimes it can get locked into a weird angle. If that's the case, then this telescope will be totally unusable. You won't even be able to see the Earth. And if you're new to telescopes, I can understand the frustration that would cause. The good news is that the fix is easy and it's free. Before we do anything, there's an easy test to find out if this is the problem on your telescope, and I call it the Clunk Test. It's very easy. You take your Astroscan telescope and you go up and down like this. If you hear a loud clunk coming from the base, that means that the foam is probably destroyed and it's time to replace it. Removing the foam is pretty easy. You just use a putty knife. In this case, I have a plastic putty knife, and you just scrape it. It comes off pretty easy. It almost falls off. Ooh, there's a prize under this one. There's some writing. There's a green dot as well. I wonder what the green dot means. I guess this foam had a piece of tape on the back, and that's what held to the glass. I'm going to try to get the tape off. I might have to use a razor. Right, the green dot's coming off. All right, there we go. This is either serial number 112080, or it means it was manufactured on November 20th, 1980. 4 1/4 f4. The green dot came off. I'll throw this in the trash. And there we go. So now we just need to trace this after I clean this mess. So the distance between the back of the mirror and the inside of the body is about 1/2 inch. But if you count this little step over here, it's actually about 0.6 of an inch. We'll round up to 0.6. I found out through experience that the important dimension is over on the sides. This is roughly 2/10, maybe 1/4 of an inch over here. The original foam, as far as I can tell, it is a soft foam and it fits most of this void, but you can get away with having kind of a disc of foam that goes back here. The important dimension is over here. You want to make sure that the minimum thickness of the disc of foam that you replace it with, if you're using one of those hard closed cell foam types of foam, you want it to be about 0.35 inches thick all the way across. But if you're using a soft cell foam, you'll want it to be, 0.4, 0.5 inches, something like that. So let's go ahead and cut some foam out. Place the mirror there and just do a very quick trace. just like that. And now we cut it out. Now this is clearly too thick. The foam itself is about 0.7. Let's taper this to about 1/4 inch. I will do the same thing with some of the more softer, spongy open-celled foam. And here's the results on that. This is really soft and spongy. So this is the open cell and this is the closed cell. I think that's what you call them. And let's do a test fit. I have my 2 foam discs. This one's about 0.35 inches. This is the hard foam, and this is really soft and spongy. This is about 1/2 inch, I guess, average thickness around here. So the way this would work is, of course, you're doing all the work from the inside, right? So let's take the mirror out. You would reach in, you'd place your foam disc right there, and then you would drop in the mirror just like that. Now you want to wear rubber gloves because you're going to have to push on here. And this is where it gets kind of tricky. You have to manage to push on this mirror while somehow, this will all be done vertically, so it'll be a little bit easier. You have to push on this mirror while letting the spring fall into place. This is using that closed cell stuff. I think this is why most people replace it with the soft cell. So let's do that. We place the open cell foam in like that. And here comes the mirror. And yeah, there's a little bit more play. So again, this would be done vertically, so I wouldn't have obviously to use my hand, but this is kind of tricky. So you push it in like that, and you finagle the ring into place, and just like that. There is a user on Cloudy Night who suggested 2 other ways to do this, and I wanted to show these because they're pretty interesting. Let's remove the spring. So that user was named Carrie R, and his suggestion is to take one of these grocery bags, right? Just plastic grocery bags. And as it turns out, it's just the right volume to actually fill the void. And sorry, I'm just trying to do this. It's tricky. There we go. So a grocery sack is just enough to fill that void. I don't know how good this will be long term, but if you're in a pinch and you don't have any foam, then go ahead and use a grocery sack. The other way that Carrie R suggested is actually it harkens back to a lot of the ways that we mount traditional mirrors and reflectors, and that is to put basically a triangle base on the bottom. Let me show you. So the 4th way uses kind of an interesting method. You know, on some of the larger Dobsonians, we have these triangular pads that we put on the back, and there's a double stick tape that goes on here, and I've done that here, so let's put these together. And this is a terrible triangle. This is only for demonstration purposes. But the purpose is that you would put a point load here, and it would distribute that load around here. And this might be the easiest way to actually put the mirror in. So you would put the mirror in like this, and of course there's a sizable gap, and then you would bring the spring in and easily put it in place. And of course, as I've already mentioned, there's a 1/4 20 threaded hole on the back. You could take a set screw and you would thread it in the back, and watch what happens. It'll push on this triangle, and it'll push it up against the spring. I'll keep turning, and you'll see it close this gap. Well, imagine the other half of the telescope is there. So this harkens back to the larger Dobsonian style telescopes. Now, of course, you couldn't use a bolt that sticks out like this. You would have to use a 1/4 20 set screw that is inset, because anything sticking out the back, as soon as you rotate the telescope around this base down here, this is going to hit it and just cause all kinds of problems. But this would be one other option. So there are 4 options, right? You could use the hard foam. You could use the soft cell foam. I think this is the one I'm going to use. If you're in a pinch, you could use a grocery sack. Thank you to Carrie R. And also Carrie R suggested using this technique as well. If you do end up restoring your Astroscan telescope, please tell me which of these methods that you ended up using. Let's do a simulated foam rebuild. I'll take my foam disc and put it down here in the hole. Then I will take my mirror and set it in basically the tray right there. It would be best to do this with the telescope pointing straight up. Put your ring in, and this is where you just have to be creative, because you can really only fit one hand down here. You push on the mirror, use gloves of course, and then just try to carefully finagle that spring into place, like that. All right, so it's in place. Now for the front, you take your secondary, and you place it in, and you take your spring, and you put that in like that. So I'm using these plastic rings for now, just for demonstration purposes. You'll probably want to go ahead and use your original metal rings, unless you need a replacement, then you go ahead and print these. At this point, you could go ahead and collimate the secondary mirror assembly. Now there is some question, what about collimating this? Well, the way this is assembled, this is fairly rigid structure. So this mirror is most likely going to be pointed straight up the tube. In theory, if you had the time, you could put a center mark on here. I bought a center mark kit from Farpoint Astro. It's pretty easy to put on the mirror. And then you could go about the traditional way of collimating. And the way you would tilt the disc is to put these little L-shaped pieces of business card, and it's black business card. So you would have to somehow squeeze this under the ring to cause the mirror to tilt ever so slightly. I have to tell you, it would be very, very, very time consuming to do this properly and completely with an Astroscan telescope. I've had very, very good luck with just collimating the secondary mirror. That was the whole focus of my first Astroscan video. Of course, I'll put a link to that in the description box. But you know, after you recollimate this, there's a very good chance you're going to have a great little telescope that's going to give you excellent views. Okay, so during that reassembly portion, you may have seen me cheat by having my left hand come in and help with the ring. One of the reasons I had to do that, of course, is because I wasn't reassembling this while it was in a vertical position. That sure does make life a whole lot easier. But in all honesty, putting this final retainer ring on the primary mirror, it's a bit tricky. It does take some time and effort. In a worst case scenario, and I can't believe I'm saying this, you can get a dowel rod, a long dowel rod, and put a really nice soft cushiony cloth on the end of it, feed that down the tube right next to your arm, and you use that dowel rod with the soft end to squish the mirror into the foam while your hand is busy manipulating that ring into the proper socket. If you take your time, you'll get this to work. And between this video and my first Astroscan video where I show you how to collimate the secondary mirror, I think you'll be able to get your Astroscan to last another 50 years. I owe my daughter a huge thanks for helping run the camera during the opening scene of this video. To everybody who is watching, thank you for sharing your attention, and clear skies, everybody.